Could Trump's tariff plans touch off stagflation? So stagflation is sort of the worst of all worlds economically. It's a period where inflation is high, but also unemployment is rising. It takes some very specific circumstances to make stagflation possible, but unfortunately, the imposition of tariffs is one of those situations. So let's start with a little background on what stagflation is. So the stag part of stagflation is short for a stagnant economy. So an economy that's not really growing, or maybe it's even contracting, and that probably also means that unemployment is rising. The inflation part, not surprisingly, means that inflation is also high. And so this is what I mean by the worst of all worlds economically. You have high prices, that's not good, and you have high unemployment, also not good. Now, in a normal economy, stagflation is pretty hard to have happen. High inflation is caused by consumer spending outpacing the economy's ability to produce. Normally, this comes about because people's incomes are growing relatively quickly, they have money to spend, and then they're sort of outspending the economy's ability to supply new goods and services. This is what causes prices to rise. So in this story, the rapidly rising consumer incomes really is the key, and that's only going to happen when job growth and therefore economic growth is strong. So in other words, in a typical inflation story, there's no stag. So normally inflation is only happening when the economy is booming. Now we could imagine a slightly different story. So what I said earlier will still hold. Inflation is caused by consumer spending outpacing the economy's ability to produce. Again, usually that's because the consumer spending part is the part that's moving too rapidly, but it doesn't have to be that way. What happens if consumer spending stays about the same, but the economy's ability to produce is the thing that contracts, right? So you can see how that would cause the same inflationary effect, just sort of from the other side. That's what economists call a supply shock. So this is what makes stagflation possible. When we say economic growth, we really just mean total production. And so if production is shrinking, so is the economy. Hence, stagnant economy plus inflation, stagflation. The sudden imposition of tariffs is actually the kind of thing that could create this supply shock effect. It directly causes the price of imported goods to rise, but it probably also causes the supply of imported goods to go down. In other words, producers from other countries are less willing to sell into the US market. It's also true that most domestically produced goods have some kind of part or raw material or what have you that is imported. So the price of production, even domestically, is going up. And when the price of production goes up, companies usually either will raise prices or they'll produce less, or maybe even both. So here we have at least a plausible scenario where stagflation could be possible. Tariffs raise prices directly, they lower production, and if those effects are large enough, that could indeed be stagflation. So to me, the question is, are these effects going to be large enough in the current environment to get to this stagflationary place? And I do have my doubts. The biggest reason is that trade as a percentage of the US economy, and by this we mean if you take total imports, you add total exports, you get the sum of those two divided by the total size of the economy, that's only 25% for the US, which sort of means that 75% of the economy is entirely produced within our borders. That's by far the highest percentage of wealthy countries. Now, one reason for that is just the US is just so large. So economists sometimes joke that trade in the US is between Texas and Tennessee. It's not so much across borders. Whereas other wealthy countries, you can imagine the UK or Germany or Japan, they're just a lot smaller. And so by necessity, they wind up trading more across their borders. The other reason why trade is relatively small in the US is because our economy is overwhelmingly a services economy. About 2/3 of total consumer spending is on services, whereas only about 11% of consumer spending is on what's called durable goods. So these are things that aren't consumed right away, and anything from toaster ovens to iPhones to Honda Accords. And that's where most of your imports are happening. So you're talking about a relatively small percentage of the economy that's heavily impacted by tariffs. And so to get that kind of stagflationary effect, you're going to need a really large impact on that relatively small sliver to either get a big move in inflation or a big contraction in growth. Now, I'm not trying to dismiss the risks of tariffs at all. I've said in, I think, several past videos that I don't think tariffs are a good policy. Certainly, it's true that the directional effects of tariffs is to lower growth and raise prices. So maybe put another way, I definitely think that the imposition of tariffs will cause growth in the US to be lower and prices in the US to be higher than they would have been otherwise over the course of 2025. But the would have been otherwise here is really the key. The US economy came into 2025 with a fair amount of momentum, and plus the most recent inflation data we've gotten has been a bit benign, indicating that maybe inflation is coming down. Now, could tariffs blunt the momentum of either of those things? It definitely could, but I'm not sure by itself tariffs are going to be enough to totally reverse positive US growth. But hey, what do you think? Do you think that there's other risks to the economy we should be talking about? Do you think the effect of tariffs is going to be larger for some reason? Put a comment in the comment section. I'd be happy to respond to anything I see there myself. And if you like this content, we'll be coming at you about once a week with reactions of economic news coming out of the White House or the Fed or things that are going on in markets. Hit that subscribe button. You'll be the first to know when we've got a new video. I'd love to see you again.